Well, I wanted to have a nice sunset video for our first video back after a fairly long hiatus, but there are not supposed to be any clouds, period, for the next like week and a half. There's a lot working against me on this shoot, actually. Maybe I'll start with that. Well, as I mentioned, this is by no means a sure shot. There's a lot working against the successful potential execution of this photo, not least of which is my limited experience with astrophotography. So I decided that since there's clear skies forecast for tonight and the foreseeable future, I would just pop out to the countryside and see if there was a scene that I could find that would suit some Milky Way photography. So for those of you who have followed my channel, you know that I only do Milky Way photography maybe once or twice a year, and I've never done it with a 50mm lens, so I don't know, challenge accepted. So why am I using the 50mm lens today? Well, for one thing, when I went to Scotland, I had to sell my 24 to 70mm f2.8 lens that helped fund my plane ticket to get there. So, so I don't have any even like moderately fast lenses at wide focal lengths. I do have a 16 to 35 f4, and my next fastest, widest compromise lens would be the Nifty 50, the 50 1.8. So this is a weird compromise because with the 50mm lens, I have to do a shorter exposure to keep the stars from blurring, because as the Earth rotates, you know, at greater magnification, you have less exposure time to work with before the stars start to get blurry and trail. So with the 50mm lens, I think I can do about a 1/6 of a second exposure. With my 16 to 35mm lens, I can usually get away with about a 20-second exposure. So I'm looking at losing a little over a couple stops of light of shutter speed and gaining a little over a couple stops of light with the aperture. So as I'm gaming it out in my head, I think I can get this about an extra 2/3 of a stop brighter. So that means 2/3 of a stop lower ISO using the 50mm lens than the 16 to 35 f4 lens. That's the way I've figured it in my head, but you know, putting it into practice, we'll see if that's the case. But also, as I was sort of researching what the Milky Way looks like at 50mm, I think it's really cool because it's going to take up most of the frame, and that means I can basically backdrop this entire barn behind the Milky Way, right? So it won't be, the Milky Way won't be a streak across the sky. It'll be like basically the whole backdrop behind this barn. So I'm going to experiment with that, and we'll see how this photo turns out. Now, the Milky Way is supposed to come up a little after 11. And then a little after 1, the moon is supposed to come up, and that's going to wash out the sky totally. And the city is also, I'm just outside of town, and the city lights are sort of just off to the left side of the frame, and so that's also going to wash out the sky with light pollution. So there's just a lot of variables here. There's going to be some experimentation, but I just wanted to bring you guys along with the process, especially because as I looked for video research on doing astrophotography, especially like landscape astrophotography with the 50mm lens, I didn't find a lot of helpful resources. So hopefully this video will be helpful for someone who's researching a photo project like this in the future. Okay, so what we have in the scene, we've got the barn, obviously, and then hopefully everything back here will be the lights of the Milky Way, and then I've been able to incorporate a little bit of the corn here in the foreground. I'm going to take the blue hour exposure at f1.8, totally wide open, and let this corn go out of focus. So it'll just be sort of an implied, vaguely agricultural foreground. Okay, I had that for a 1/13 of a second at f1.8 and ISO 100. I'll make sure everything is locked down nice and tight on the tripod. When I come back to take it later, that background exposure should composite nicely with this one if I keep everything locked down on manual and don't make any adjustments. Well, what remains is very much a waiting game. There's probably an hour and a half, 2 hours before the Milky Way broaches the horizon, and until then, it's a pretty good night for stargazing, honestly. So while I was tempted to maybe fill this time with taking a nap, I think I'll just enjoy the view out the window and the sunroof. So the weather's not the only thing that's kept me from making some YouTube videos recently. As you might have recalled, I mentioned that I was hosting my very first gallery exhibit last month, and I wanted to dedicate as much time as possible to making sure that that was a successful process, and I have to say it has been successful. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about the gallery exhibit. It's something that I want to make a dedicated video about soon, so if you're curious about how successful it was, or if maybe this is something you might be interested in doing, be sure you're subscribed. There'll be more information about that coming up on the channel, but just wanted to say thanks for everyone that did participate, and there is still an opportunity to see it. And there's also an online companion gallery on my website, mattramsey.gallery, where you can see the entire collection, and you can also purchase the prints that are remaining. So I'll have a link for that down in the video description. But for now, I think I'll just enjoy the view. Okay, I'm starting into my Milky Way photos now, and I've already had to make some readjustments, mostly because of the light pollution. Like I mentioned, I expected that would be a problem towards the right side of the frame, and it has been. So I've actually recomposed. I've lowered the composition a little bit so that I can feature more of the corn in the foreground, and I've recomposed vertically so that I can also show off more of the sky, because to the left and the right areas of the image are the right parts totally washed out by light pollution, and then the left side is sort of a repeating pattern, so it's not as interesting to me. So I've gone for this vertical composition, and I'm going to go ahead and start making Milky Way exposures. But I will say that the Milky Way, because of the light pollution, is not especially visible, but it is helping me to get some better, like ISO 800 level exposures, just doing regular starry sky photos. I'll go ahead and take the photos now, so I'll have to kill this light, but I'll show you afterwards the photos that I made, and I'll tell you the camera settings that I used as well.